Welcome everybody to the next in the series of ISBL podcasts with frontline practitioners. And today I'm joined by Sophie Teasdale from St Cuthbert's Academy Trust in Hull. Welcome.
Hi.
Hi. So today's conversation is going to focus on financial planning in light of COVID. And as we start to reopen schools, we're going to touch on how we're adjusting forecasts and building in contingencies for unanticipated costs and expenditure. And there are three kind of broad areas really. What additional expenditure have you incurred to date? What, if any, income have you lost? If you had any trading income, have you taken a hit? And what new expenditure are you having to think about as you build your new plans and reforecast your budgets in light of the pandemic? So Sophie, just on the kind of broader subject of financial planning, have you had to go back to your original budget forecasts and recast them?
Yes, absolutely. We've been trying to make the best of the guidance that we've had centrally, and have been right from the outset trying to capture particularly any extraordinary COVID costs, if you want to look at it like that. And it was a huge relief to get confirmation of the additional budget that we are expecting. At some point in June, we're expecting the guidance on how we can actually claim for that. But in the meantime, we're sort of busy accruing quite rapidly now costs to set against that, under the three main headings of sort of the cleaning, the IT, and any other sort of hygiene related expenditure that we're incurring in terms of keeping our schools fit and COVID secure for the key workers and the vulnerable children that we are open to, and indeed now the imminent preparations for potential reopening on the 1st of June. That has been, I think, there's been some conflict in relation to other pressures that we've had around the procurement notice that was issued, and around the obligation for us to obviously maintain funds flowing to our suppliers, to our essential suppliers, and potentially for services that we may not be receiving. And probably the third nail in our particular coffin is we are quite an active income generating trust, and obviously our income streams on that front have been literally cut dead, and with absolutely nothing on the horizon for any sort of recourse for that.
No, that's really interesting. So in terms of the additional expenditure that you've incurred, is there a particular of the three categories that government made commitment to refund? Is there a particular area where you spent more or less? So against premises, cleaning, and free school meals.
Initially, we set up, we decided to go for FSM vouchers right from the go-get, really. We have a wide geographical catchment area for our secondary school, so it was always going to be difficult for us to provide for free school meals students on site, because the students just couldn't access us. So we went for the voucher scheme quite early, so the first 3 weeks the costs were accrued against that. We migrated across to Eden Red, for better or for worse. Obviously, at least that's taken it, away from our bottom line. So that was a relief. Although there's been obviously major issues with the scheme, and I'm sure anybody watching this podcast will be feeling my pain. Right now, and where we are in the in the throes of preparing for reopening, the majority of the spend is being set against additional cleaning routines, resource, manpower, materials, etc.
Yeah. And presumably as part of your contingency planning, as you've been working through the guidance, and the guidance is ever changing, and there's lots of it. Has your expectation in terms of the expenditure on reopening shifted from, say, a couple of weeks ago? So are you thinking now, I need more PPE, I need less PPE, I need more chemicals, I need less? How's the thinking shifted in light of the guidance, if at all?
Well, when the initial figures were published around the 75,000 for sort of the secondary school of our size, and the figures, and I looked at the costs we were incurring, and I thought, okay, that's going to be there or thereabouts. But now I can see much more clearly the dramatically enhanced cleaning and hygiene schedule that we're going to need to have potentially for some time to come. So actually now I'm thinking that it will go in excess of the figures that are currently being offered to us. And I would hope that obviously if that is the case, and we feed that back as being the case, that will be reflected on and perhaps reviewed. We are in a situation where we are trying to obviously assure our families, assure our parents, assure our community, our staff and our students that coming back will be as safe as it possibly could be. And in order to do that, we feel that some of the guidance doesn't go far enough. It's been clear that it's not expected that we will have the benefit of PPE, and yet we're fairly clear ourselves that certain roles we would expect to have the benefit of PPE, and indeed our staff are feeding back to us very clearly saying that in some of the roles, medical roles, school nurse type roles, in those kinds of arenas, they absolutely want, a belt and braces NHS standard PPE response. And so we are obviously doing our best to secure that provision. And indeed, that's obviously a cost to ourselves. In addition, it's really important that we comply with all the correct standard of cleaning materials, and everything needs to be checked. I wish there was some central procurement that we could go to that would help us with these matters, but realistically, knowing what's happened before in our other colleagues in the public sector, I think most schools are just taking matters into their own hands, most trusts, and just pushing on as best they can.
Yeah, I think that's a fair conclusion in terms of the mood music around central procurement. So there's a couple of things you touched on there which I'm interested to explore. The 75,000 that you talk about, which you're eligible for, that's the eligibility for your individual school. As a trust, how are you dealing with this? Are you aggregating your claims back to the department, or are you doing it on a individual by individual school basis?
No, we're trying to do as much centrally as we can. We're actually mid-centralisation of our finance and our business support function. So we're not perfectly set up to do that, but we're pretty well set up. And obviously we're just keen to minimise the amount of work that anyone is having to do in the trust. It is a frustration that there are multiple trusts replicating this kind of activity. It could have been obviously a lot more streamlined, a lot more simplified, and possibly also a lot more cost effective, and we would be getting products that we knew had already been sort of assured, etc. But it's not the case, so we've got to play the game that's in front of us, and as such we are individually tracking our extraordinary expenditure, but that is then coming into the centre for analysis, checking, and obviously ultimately for spending against.
Okay, well, that makes sense. And you talked about just moving away from finance slightly. You talked about the guidance not going far enough, and of course you're having to deal with levels of confidence across both your teaching cohort and parents. At the moment, where would you say the nervousness sits? Is it parents, or is it teachers, or is it both?
Yeah, it's absolutely both. We're in the stage of having sent out our initial surveys to assess primary demand, and that's around student audits. And we've sought feedback from families, from parents, from carers, and indeed matching that against staff availability, and we've sought feedback from our staff. And I would say the issues are shared equally amongst both areas. And at the moment, and it is it's still yet to be drilled down further, but it's looking like we have about a third of our community that are keen to come back at the first possible opportunity. A third who absolutely do not want to, do not think that it's safe enough to do so at the moment for themselves or their children. And a third sat on the fence and waiting for further information from us. Waiting for additional guidance from the government to determine whether or not they wish to take up these offers.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And in terms of, so as a central team, as a group of leaders, what's your feelings about accountability? So the guidance suggests that it's up to the responsible body. So in the case of the trust, it would be the chief executive, the accounting officer, along with the chair of trustees. In the case of Maintain School, it's really the local authority that's ultimately responsible. How does that level of accountability, almost liability, sit with your leadership team, given where we are, and that at the moment we're heading at pace towards an early June reopening?
That's a really interesting question. Ordinarily, we would relish our own accountability. And indeed, to be fair, we never for one moment thought it would come down to anything other than our directors, our board of directors, effectively having the final say in terms of law. We were very clear on what our legal position was going to be. Clearly, had the government decided to come over the top of that, then obviously we would have gone along with whatever direction we got. We're diocesan schools, so it would have been for us from our diocese. But that hasn't happened, so it is very much our decision, and that decision will be taken on the basis of whether or not we feel, with all of the facts in front of us, that it is safe for us to recommend a return. We will make that decision in principle ahead of the 28th of May, but of course we will be waiting with bated breath to see what occurs on the national stage.
And that is interesting, and I think it's consistent with the guidance, although there has been some misinterpretation of that. So what I'm hearing, and I hope I've interpreted this correctly, is that you're taking matters into your own hands, in the sense that you're looking carefully at the guidance, you're looking at the evidence, you'll come to a determination as close to the 28th, but almost certainly before the 28th, before you actually press the green light. And you're doing that, you're not waiting for permission, and you're not, you don't feel that there is prescription. You're saying, given the knowledge that we have, and as guidance develops, we will take a decision that we believe is right for our context. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that's fair. It is a very delicate and difficult situation, and it's full of conflicts. Not particular to the education sector. We can see the conflicts that have emerged day to day with some of the guidance that has materialised. And obviously the key conflict for us, particularly in the primary sector, is the inability to be able to guarantee social distancing. We have been provided with clear guidance as to what is acceptable, or what is deemed acceptable from a national standpoint, that if you have these various steps in place, that is acceptable, and we will present that to both our leadership and to our community, and say, this is the very best that we can do, with those guidelines implemented to the very best of our ability. how do you respond to that? Is that acceptable for you? Is that acceptable for your children?
Yeah, which I think is, you know, a sensible way forward. Are you talking to insurers at the moment in terms of what policies will cover and what they won't cover? And given that even if you can't, and I'm sure it's quite difficult to cover for you know, direct COVID related illness, but given that you're going to potentially reconfigure, repurpose your schools, they may look different. They almost certainly will look different. The flow will be different. The way that you secure the premises, if you're in any way going to stagger children coming in and children leaving. Are you having insurance conversations with insurers about the changes?
Yeah, we're having regular conversations. We're not an RPA school or trust,
Right.
And it may well be in due course when we can reflect on this, that RPA have been slightly more in tune with the sector. I'm not sure. I've just got a few things to go on at the moment, but we have therefore had to have regular conversations with our insurers, who have been broadly, well, they've been listening for sure. But there have been some major issues, and particularly around not so much the repurposing of the school. I think they're pretty well on board with that, but just around key things like school trips, and that potentially is going to have a massive implication for our bottom line for any reforecasting that we need to do, if indeed we lose the potential funds that currently we may do if the insurance companies or indeed the tour operators don't make good on refunds.
So that liability is quite sobering for you, I guess, isn't it? It is. I don't know what the extent of it is, but it sounds like for you it's a concern that if you're not able to get the reimbursement from the insurers, you're having to deal with claims coming in from parents and reimburse them, and that leaves quite a dent in your finances.
Absolutely, it's been very difficult. We have a range of families from all different backgrounds, many of whom are in these times, as with a lot of people, very financially challenged, and so they've looked to the school to return funds which they've lodged with us in good faith that their children were going to have these fantastic opportunities, which sadly are no longer available to them, and some of these opportunities were qualification related as well. So it's been very challenging to continually kind of put them on hold and not be able to fully reimburse them until we're clearer what exactly our liability will be.
Yeah. I mean, it's a conversation to continue to have with the department. So I think not so much the DFE, but government more broadly are obviously concerned about businesses across the economy going bust, and so they worry that putting too much pressure on these companies will cause an issue there. But that's as far as I'm concerned, they either underwrite the cost to schools, or they insist that they refund schools one way or the other. The education system can't be out of pocket. And I think the same goes with other contracts that we are supposed to be honouring. There's an expectation that any contracts that we've entered into, be it for cleaning or grounds maintenance or whatever it might be, that we honour those contracts. Well, that's fine, but it can't be. And I think the education sector's been very good at trying to be accommodating, but it can't be at the expense of already very tight school budgets. So I think that conversation is going to continue. I know that officials in the background are looking very closely at all of this stuff, and hopefully we'll get some answers sooner rather than later. Just coming back to sort of budget, budget planning, forecasting, and in the case of Academy Land, there are a whole bunch of returns. Was it helpful at all to have the BFRO suspended, or not suspended, but cancelled for this year?
Yeah, yeah, I think I could hear a wave of sweeping across the nation of fellow CFOs. But yeah, I mean, it was very timely for them to make that judgment. But equally, amongst our trust, and certainly with my finance committee, my directors, financial committee, we had agreed that we were going to try and run everything in the background as tightly and as much the same as we would, knowing that at some point, we would be accounting for everything, and particularly for anything new in the system where the legislation has come, but we haven't quite been used to factoring that into our sort of audit processes. So we talked at length to our external auditors to get their view on what they felt our response needed to be as a trust. And so pretty much it's given us a bit of space, it's given us a bit of breathing time, but we are trying to, behind the reports that would have gone off to the SFA, we are trying to run things pretty much as normal.
Yeah, and I think that's, I think that's very reassuring to hear, because Eileen Milner's letter offered some concessions, and there were some relaxations, but I think the message was very clear that good financial governance should continue in the way that it always had, and that audit committees shouldn't become complacent. I know there's some latitude in there in terms of internal audit, responsible officer type functions, and that's understandable given that you can't physically be on site at the moment. But there are other things you can do. And what about the BFR? So the BFRO, that's been cancelled. The BFR is still there. There's a deferred decision until June. When I talk to a lot of CFOs, FDs, school business leaders, they're saying, but actually, if we wait until the end of May, early June, we've done all the work anyway. Yeah. What's your view on that?
No, I completely concur with that. At the moment, we're looking at migrating across to the chart of accounts as well. So we don't really want to slow that down or stop that. So in essence, all of the information will be there. Where we lodge it is less of an issue, and the biggest headache with both those returns is definitely the portal, and not actually our ability to supply the information.
I'll pass that on to colleagues at the department. We work very closely with those that are looking at the best financial reporting toolkit and portfolio of forms. But yes, I hear you. Yeah. So I'm intrigued. So you're migrating across to the new chart of accounts, which there are a group of trusts across the system that are doing that. How have you found that experience?
Well, we've literally only just it was always in the plan, because we were centralising our finances as a trust and doing all of the things associated with that. So it was always the plan. We toyed with looking if we were going to be one of the sort of the first to use it last year, but felt it was just a little bit too soon for us. So we're very keen to adopt it this year. And as I say, we've been working closely with our external auditors who are keen for us to adopt it. They work closely with the SFA themselves. So it makes sense, and that is still the ambition. We're certainly moving towards that, and then that will hopefully feed into all of the requirements that the SFA puts in front of us for reporting in a much more streamlined fashion.
Yeah, and I think that's the ambition, isn't it? So we line everything up. We're much more efficient in terms of passporting that information from individual trusts to the department, and then the whole government consolidation piece is more straightforward. But hopefully, the consolidation piece for individual trusts is that much easier. So you talked about moving to a much more centralised approach to everything that you're doing. Are you considering gag pooling, for example?
Yeah, we've been informally pooling our gag for probably the last 12 months. The way that we are now set up with our committees and our audit committee, and the way everything feeds into the ultimate trust boards, we have quite a tight delegation of authorities. So in essence, we are working to a pool gag. We just haven't formally transferred across our systems across to reflect that yet.
And how's that been received across the trust? Because I know there's sometimes some scepticism about the motives for schools gag pooling, and I've always talked about gag pooling being more about hearts and minds than it is about the mechanics of actually putting it in place. If people trust that, and leaders trust that by centralising things, they'll have more resources available for frontline teaching and learning, and they trust the centre to do the things that can be done more efficiently through aggregation and economies of scale, then it works. But where there's some scepticism that there's money going under a mattress for a rainy day, for or that money's being unfairly moved from one part of the trust to another, then that's when things break down. What's your kind of sense of how that's being received in your own trust?
I think it's happened. It's evolved very naturally and very organically with the trust as the expanded trust has matured. We joined the trust as a large secondary in October 2017, and obviously we've developed and grown and our processes and our reporting processes and everything around that over that time. And because of that, actually, the decision to pool the gag has just happened completely organically, as leaders of the schools were looking to the centre for inputs and assurances, and we were increasingly managing the budget from the centre. It literally just happened very, very naturally. We obviously took a point where we actually decided, yes, we are going to do this, but that was only because effectively we were doing it in all but name anyway, because that was the way the trust had naturally and organically progressed. In terms of the hearts and minds, therefore, we haven't recently really had to do any work around that whatsoever, because there is such a dynamic conversation going on. We're really lucky because our trust is geographically very tight, so it's very easy for us to have those conversations, physical or indeed over a digital platform as we are now. I know that for other trusts that are much more widespread and have much more varied scenarios, shall we say, that might be a very different connection that they have between the schools. But for us, it's actually fallen out quite spontaneously, and we haven't had any issues with it.
That's great. That sounds like you've got to a place where that transition is going to be pretty seamless. So well done for creating that. Great. I mean, it's about culture, isn't it? And you've created a culture where there isn't deep suspicion or skepticism. So in that context, it clearly works quite well. That's great. I just finally like to touch on how you see things, and it's difficult to predict because there are so many unknowns, but how you see things evolving over the next few weeks. How do you think your job is going to look compared to the way it was pre-COVID in this reopening phase?
For blimey, where to start? I think in the next few weeks, it really is just about being there to completely support the operational activities, the boots on the ground, and to take as much as possible away from what is having to happen on a local basis. So we're trying to establish as many generic actions that we can in the run up to reopening. And if it is generic across the trust, we'll take it at the centre, and leave the local leadership to manage the things that need to be bespoke to their particular environment. So it really is, it's time when I think you unexpectedly get back into contact with the real nitty gritty of your schools and your school's budget. So that's probably an unexpectedly good thing, albeit in a very difficult and of course incredibly challenging set of circumstances. The best that we can do, I think, at the moment is to support the schools to get where they need to get to quickly by the 1st of June, to make sure that we are keeping really tight and clear guidance and assurance around the decisions that we're making. It's very easy to feel pressured into making certain decisions which you think are in the interests of getting the school from A to B, but actually could be unpicked very easily. So it's about avoiding those situations, making everybody feel confident in the decisions that we are making, keeping really close with our directors and with our finance directors particularly, to make sure that those lines of assurance and audit are there and are a bit more dynamic than usual. We can't wait for our half-term meeting. We've got a much more regular, shorter sort of briefing set up so that we can continually run things past them. And then when we get back up and running, then that will be the time to take a breath, reflect where we are and bring everything together as we move into the pre-audit period. And one would hope at that point we will, to some degree, it will be business as usual in whatever this mystical new normal is.
No, what wise words. And finally, just because I recognise that it's quite a heavy burden to carry, but when you are part of a central team, when you're part of an executive group of leaders, albeit with different strands of responsibility, calming the nerves of the teams on the ground, as you described, the boots on the ground, the local leaders, the local administrators, the pedagogical leaders, pedagogical staff. Have you thought about how you're going to, as a leadership team, have you thought about how you're going to calm those nerves, provide the support and reassurance along the way? Because presumably as people come back, there's going to be some jitteriness and some anxiety.
Absolutely. We all feel it ourselves. I think, it would be wrong of us to say that we weren't feeling nervous and slightly anxious about the next few weeks. It's a journey that none of us have gone on before, and we have to be alert and agile, I believe is the sort of fashionable phrase at the moment, to respond to the many unpredictable things that are being put in front of us. That said, we are organisations that are well capable of delivering against the guidelines that are being put in front of us. Whether the guidelines are entirely fit for purpose, that's not for me to say. We are measuring ourselves by them. We offer that out to our communities, our families and our staff alike. And we let them make their final decisions about how they want to respond against those. But I think, like most trusts, we'll be in a position to put out a clear and a confident response, and hopefully that will enable us to grow, to start small, grow steady, but grow surely and certainly, so that we can offer something by way of a face-to-face educational offer through to the end of the summer term, and we'll just see how that pans out.
And that sounds like that. That if I was working for your trust, I'd feel like I was in safe hands. So that's a lovely message. Sophie, it's been a delight talking to you. Really fascinating. Clearly, there's quite a unique perspective that you've offered, and I think this will resonate with with a lot of leaders who are indeed looking across not just one school but a number of schools. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you for the wonderful work that you're doing. Every bit a critical worker as anybody else that's doctor, nurse, policeman, fireman, whatever else. You're clearly fighting the really good fight. So again, thank you for your time, and stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you.